Welcome to a new episode in our series History of Astrology. Today we will be talking about Proclos on Providence, and I'm taking some quotes from this book, and I'm starting on page 6, I think. Let me see. The introduction. Chapter 2, the debate on Providence, fate, and free choice in the imperial period. And then Proclos sources and Stoicism. And the first quote is on page 6. In his Handbook of Platonism, Alcinous devotes chapter 26 to an explanation of Plato's doctrine on fate. His starting point is the celebrated myth of air, which concludes Plato's Republic. The myth of air tells how the human souls have to make a choice of life before they are incarnated in bodies. This choice is their own inalienable responsibility. They should not complain later and accuse fate and the gods if they see what events of life follow once they made a wrong choice. In Alcinous' interpretation, Plato does not understand fate as an absolute determinism, but as a conditional necessity. The initial choice is not itself determined by fate, but sets the condition for fate. Once taken this decision, the consequences follow inevitably. Therefore, Plato insists that the responsibility belongs to the one who chooses. This doctrine of conditional fate is also found in another author's drawing on Middle Platonic material, such as Pseudo-Plutarch on fate, Nemesis and Chalcidius. Proclos adopted this doctrine in his own explanation of the myth of air. In the Stoic view, providence must be identified with fate. Both terms have a different meaning. Haemarmene indicates the inevitable sequence of events in the chain of causes, or noia, providence, indicates that the physical order is the expression of a divine reason. In reality, however, the providential order is nothing but the necessity of the chain of causes and events. In opposition to this view, the Middle Platonists clearly distinguished fate from providence and subordinated the former to the latter, and subordinated fate to providence. As Nemesius formulates it, all that happens in accordance with fate happens also in accordance with providence, but not all that is in accordance with providence is also in accordance with fate. So far, this quote. I'll take the next quote from page 8, the Chaldean oracles. The Chaldean oracles offer another example of this obsession with fate. In the oracles, the realm of fate is identical with that of nature, the lowest part of the world soul. The personification of fate is the three-faced goddess Hecate, who, with the demonic powers subordinated to her, exercises authority over the physical world and therefore also plays an important role in magical and theurgical prayers and practices. Hecate, princess of the demons, the daimons, commands the dark powers which enslave the corporeal existence of man, and extends her dominion over all natures, which their fear of the daimons had given up to her. Chapter 6, Plotinus, quote, among the first works of Plotinus is a treatise on fate, Ennead 3:1-3. In this early work, Plotinus discusses from a Platonic point of view the different views on fate defended by Peripatetics, Epicureans, Stoics, and astrologers. In his own answer, Plotinus attempts to reconcile a causal explanation of all events, which will leave nothing causeless and will preserve sequence and order, with human responsibility, which allows us to be something. Plotinus finds a solution in the Platonic doctrine on the soul, taking the soul, both the soul of the universe as the soul of the individual, as an initiating cause. We can admit that all things happen accordingly to causes if we include among those causes the souls. Plotinus also introduces a distinction between the soul without the body, which is absolutely free when it follows right reason, and the soul that is in the body and suffers together with the body. Proclos will adopt this distinction between two states of the soul as one of the fundamental principles for any discussion on fate and freedom. On page 9, 7, Porphyry. Porphyry composed a treatise on what depends on us, which has been preserved by Stobaeus. The starting point of the discussion is again the myth of air. Porphyrius defends Plato against interpreters who accuse him of undermining free choice in this myth of air. Before entering the body, every soul can freely choose between different types of life, but once incarnated in a particular body, the free choice of the soul is limited and determined by the particular constitution of the body correspondent to its initial choice in the myth of air. For that reason, fate is not an absolute necessity, but a conditional law. In Porphyrius' view, Plato composed his myth of air to react against the astrological beliefs of the Egyptians, according to which the horoscope of our birth determines our choice of life. In the Platonic view, horoscopes only indicate types of life, but do not force them upon the souls. And on the same page, page 9, number 8, Jamblichus. Among his many sources, Proclos mentions Jamblichus' innumerable arguments on fate and providence. Of those arguments, we have, alas, only some sections from his letters to Sopater and Macedonius, preserved in the Anthology of Stobaeus. The excerpts allow us to understand what Proclus appreciated in Jamblichus, in particular his views on the subordination of fate to providence. Quote, in the quote, in its very substance, fate is enmeshed with providence and exists by virtue of the existence of providence and derives its existence from it and within its ambit. Jamblichus also insisted on the transcendence of the rational soul beyond the range of fate. Insofar as the soul gives itself to the realm of generation and subjects itself to the flow of the universe, thus far also it is drawn beneath the sway of fate and is enslaved to the necessity of nature. But on the other hand, insofar as it exercises its intellectual activity that is really left free from everything and independent in its choices, Thus far it voluntarily minds its own business and lays hold of what is divine and good and intelligible with the accomplishment of truth. On page 10, Hierocles, quote, in the early 5th century, Hierocles composed in Alexandria a treatise on Providence. We know the content of this treatise only through excerpts and summaries. Photius made of it in his Bibliotheca. Hierocles understands providence as the order of the universe that proceeds from the divine demiurge. In this providence, the gods, the superior beings as angels and demons, all have their role. Fate is defined as the justice that accompanies providence and is subordinated to it. In the material world, providence only reaches as far as genera and species. In order to reconcile free will and fate, Hierocles applies the theory of conditional fate, which was developed in Middle Platonism. And the next quote is from page 14. Although Theodore uses no explicit astrological arguments in his letter to Proclos, the fact that he understands the whole world as a mechanical system is a sufficient proof that he probably adhered to a form of astrological determinism which was very popular among pagan intellectuals in the last century of the Roman Empire. The most impressive document on the dominance of astrological determinism among pagan intellectuals in the 4th century is the vast treatise on astrology, Mathesis, composed by the Roman senator Julius Firmicus Maternus between 334 and 337. Although this author is influenced by Platonic views, he attacks Plotinus because he attributes nothing to the power of the stars and reserves nothing for the necessity of fate, but says that everything is in our power. He also criticizes those who accept that birth and death are sub fato, but maintain that the course of our life is in our power. But if the necessity of fatal laws determine the beginning and the end of our life, how could what is between those terms escape fate? And the next quote is 3 preliminary distinctions. The main focus of Proclos' treatise is to solve the various problems that Theodore put forward regarding the hypothesis of free choice. This is done in the second part of the treatise. Before, however, entering the discussion of each of the 8 problems Proclos discusses, in a first general part, 3 distinctions which, in his view, are fundamental presuppositions in the whole debate. For if the opponents do not agree on these 3 points, it is useless to go on with the discussion. First is the distinction between providence and fate. The second distinction is that between 2 types of soul. The third distinction concerns knowledge and truth. And the last quote I'm taking from this book is, the practice and alleged success of divination was one of the standard arguments for the Stoics for the determinism of the universe. In his On Fate, Chrysippus presented the following argument. The predictions of the soothsayers could not be true if all things were not embraced by fate. Such an argument is also developed in Cicero's On Divination. In his attack on determinism, Alexander mentions this Stoic position, Those who sing the praises of prophecy and say that it is preserved only by their own deterministic account and use it as a proof that all things come to be in accordance with faith, and so on. So far about this book. And now I'm taking some quotes from this book. Let's see where we start. From the introduction on page 1. Worries about providence arise only in a specific philosophical or religious context. The main assumption is obviously the belief that there is providence at all. Epicureans, for instance, rejected this idea and were therefore free of the accompanying puzzles and fears. Actually, to be free of these additional worries was one of the main reasons for denying the existence of providence, so they argued. And further down, since the providence exercised by the divinity was by definition seen as good, the issue arises what to think about things that are not so good or even downright evil. And further down on page 2, another set of problems had to do with the mode of cognition and activity of the primary divinities, among whom the highest source of providence was to be sought. For the highest metaphysical principle and the entities in its vicinity in some way think and act in a timeless manner. Everything which is present to them, including things that have a temporal and even contingent existence, is held to be present to them in a manner that transcends time and contingency, and so on. And let's see, I think that was all I wanted to quote from this book. So I recommend both books if you want to dig into the problem of providence and fate. Thanks for stopping by, and till next time.